All right, good morning, everyone. I hate to break up the conversation, but we're going to go ahead and get started. Claire, do you want to unmute yourself, or Cheryl?
Cheryl.
Dr. Christine Ekenga, Sisters of St. Joseph's Associates, and all of our guests, welcome. My name is Cheryl Archibald, and it is an honor and pleasure on behalf of the Racial and Cultural Justice Committee to welcome you here today to J.O.E Talks. We are delighted to have you with us and participate and share in our second year of J.O.E Talks. J.O.E Talks is committed to actively educate and raise awareness on different issues. It is our hope to create teams of informed people who will work for systemic change. We are honored to have Dr. Christine Ekenga, who will raise our awareness on environmental injustice and poor health outcomes. Prepare yourselves to be challenged, excited, and inspired. Now I will hand the mic over to Sarah Baker, who will provide a tutorial on Zoom.
Good morning. This is Sarah Baker, Communication Specialist for the Sisters of St. Joseph, and I would just like to go over a few of the Zoom tools that we will be using throughout this event. So to begin, we just ask that you put your screen to speaker view. This will make the speakers central on your screen with the participants scrolling across, as opposed to the gallery view, which displays a screen full of participants. So the speaker view will make it easier for you to follow along. And to change that, you want to click on the icon on the top right of your screen to set your view style. I know this may be different for those who are on tablets and phones, but for laptops, I know the icon is at the top right of your screen. Next, we ask that you keep your computer or your devices on mute during the presentations unless otherwise instructed. There will be a time when you will be placed in small groups for discussion and you will need to turn your microphone on. The microphone control icon is at the bottom left of your screen. When you are muted, you will see a red line through the mic. When the time comes and you need to unmute, you will click on that icon, that mic icon, to unmute yourself. For phones, if you're on the phone, hit *6 to unmute. Next is our chat box that enables you to type a message to the group. We are going to ask you to use this feature a couple times during the presentation. The chat icon is located at the bottom center that looks like a word bubble. If you are on a tablet or iPhone, you may need to tap your screen for the icon to reappear. You will click on the icon to bring up the chat area. It will appear on the right of your screen to type a message. To type a message, go to the bottom of that chat area. Make sure the to field is set to everyone and click in the field where it says type message here. After you are done, you will type enter, you will hit enter. During Dr. Ekenga's presentation, you will be able to send in questions for the Q&A session. We ask that you type your questions in the chat box area and hit enter. Sister Claire Bass will then read the questions to Dr. Ekenga during the Q&A portion. We will also be using our breakout rooms for small discussion after Dr. Ekenga's presentation. And we will go through those in more detail when we get to that part. So I just thank you for going over these Zoom tools with us, and Associate Cheryl Archibald will now lead us in prayer and introduce our speaker. Cheryl.
Thank you. Would everyone please bow your heads? Good and gracious God, we thank you for this day. We thank you for all your graces and mercies that you have continued to bestow upon us. Lord, open our hearts, open our eyes, open our ears this day that we may hear and be inspired this day to be a people who will bring forth a change for a better world. We ask for this and all graces in your loving name. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Dr. Christine Ekenga's research focuses on the epidemiology of chronic diseases such as cancer, respiratory diseases. She is particularly interested in assessing methods of research and clinical practice. Her current work includes examining how lifestyle, environmental, and occupational factors interact with to influence health and well-being. She is a member of the Alvin J. Siteman Cancer Center and a faculty scholar at the Institute of Public Health at Washington University. She teaches courses in the Master of Public Health program at the Brown School. Her research has appeared in American Journal of Public Health, Cancer, Environmental Health, and the Journal of American Medical Association. Please help me welcome Dr. Christine Ekenga.
Thank you. Thank you, Associate Cheryl and Sister Claire, for that introduction. And thank you all for inviting me to be here today. I'm so excited to be here. What I will do is try and share my screen, and hopefully this will work. And if I could get a thumbs up if this is working for you all, great. Okay, so again, thank you for inviting me. I'm so excited to be here. Just a little bit about me. I am an epidemiologist, not an infectious disease epidemiologist, but I study chronic diseases, and I'm really interested in environmental factors. So thinking about where people live, where people work, their school, where they play, and how those factors can influence health outcomes. And I'll show you some examples in a couple of minutes. And, you know, the overall goal of my work and why I like coming out and speaking to groups is that I like to promote health and well-being for all. And by thinking about how we can promote healthy environments at home, work, school, and play. And so I am on the faculty at Washington University. And of course, you know, being a professor, I'm going to give a short lecture because I want to introduce you all to the concept of environmental justice. And in the chat, if I could just get like a yes or a no, if you've heard of the term environmental justice before, go ahead and let me know in the chat. Okay, we've got a couple of people who've heard of it. Good. So there is an official, let's see here, there we go. There's an official definition from the EPA of environmental justice. And, it's the key concepts here are two terms, a fair treatment and meaningful involvement. So it's the idea that all people in all communities have a right to equal environmental protection under the law. And they have a right to live, work, and play in communities that are safe, healthy, and free of life-threatening conditions. And so this definition was created in the mid-90s, and there was a lot of work that happened before then. And so I'll give a brief history lesson of the environmental justice movement. And the environmental justice movement, it emerged in the 1980s, but it really began in the 60s and the 70s, thinking about the civil rights movement and the environmental movement. So civil rights in the 60s, environmental movement in the 70s. And one of the earliest events here, so this is a picture on the left here from a march in Memphis. And I tell the students, Martin Luther King is one of the earliest advocates for environmental justice because we all know he was assassinated in Memphis, and he was there in Memphis to support striking sanitation workers. So one of the first time African Americans really mobilized against environmental injustices was in Memphis, and he was advocating for better working conditions and pay for striking sanitation workers. So that's one of the earliest environmental justice protests. One of the first lawsuits and really brought some legal issues in terms of environmental justice was in the late 70s, in 1979 in Houston. And these were residents of a middle-class neighborhood, and they found out that the local waste company wanted to sit a landfill in their neighborhood. And by every metric and measure, this is not a neighborhood where you would place a landfill. This is an upper middle class professional neighborhood. And so the residents thought that they were being targeted because of their race. So this is the first civil rights lawsuit against an environmental act by a waste company in terms of placing the landfill in their neighborhood in 1979. Unfortunately, the residents of this Houston suburb, they lost the lawsuit. But these are just a couple of examples of, again, of people thinking about civil rights and environmental protection and the origins of the environmental justice movement. The catalyst of the movement, if we have anyone on the chat from North Carolina, let me know. And yes, if you have any questions for me, please type them in the chat. I'll be checking as I go through this brief talk here. The catalyst of the movement was in North Carolina, in Warren County, North Carolina. And this was when the state decided to place, again, another landfill, a PCB landfill in this community that was mostly rural and mostly poor, and also mostly African American. So this was the second time that African Americans mobilized, and this was a nationwide, people from all over the country came to Warren County, North Carolina to protest against this landfill. So there were sit-ins. On the right upper right-hand corner here, you can see people laying in the street trying to prevent dump trucks from coming into the county there. And they were protesting against sitting this landfill in the neighborhood. Over 500 people were arrested. This is considered one of the largest civil rights protests since Martin Luther King was protesting in Memphis. And unfortunately, similar to what happened in Houston, they were unsuccessful in preventing this landfill from being placed there, but they got a lot of attention. Civil rights groups, environmental groups from all over the country were paying attention to what happened in North Carolina. And the government, the US government paid attention as well. And so they decided to commission a study. And the US GAO, they commissioned a study to look at where hazardous waste landfills were being placed in communities. And they focused on the 8 southeastern states. And what they found was really interesting. They found that even though the region was 20% Black overall, 3 out of every 4 hazardous waste sites and landfills were located in mostly Black neighborhoods. So this was a landmark study, and it was conducted by the government, but a lot of these companies kind of pushed back against the findings, and they argue that a lot of these places where these landfills are placed, they're poor areas. The land is cheap, and so this is an ideal place. I don't know if ideal is the right word, but this is a place where you would place a landfill. We're not really targeting these communities because of race. And what's really interesting is after this report, another report was commissioned by Dr. Benjamin Chavis. He was then the director of the United Church of Christ's Commission on Racial Justice. And he commissioned a report called Toxic Waste and Race, the UCC, under the direction of Dr. Chavis commissioned this report. And what they did was they looked at both race and income. And they wanted to get an idea of, to answer really the question, is it race or is it income where these sites are placed? And unfortunately, so this is a report was first published in 1987. They found that race was a factor in where these sites were placed, even more than income. And what's really, I tell my students, what's really disappointing is that 20 years later, they conducted the same report. And they found that this was still the case 20 years later, over here in 2007, that there was an association between race and where these landfills were placed. So I mentioned, the movement starts in the 60s and 70s, and then all of these events in the 80s. And finally, the government responds. So under President Clinton, there was an executive order signed, and the executive order required that every federal agency make achieving environmental justice a part of its mission. So they have to identify, address, and identify and address where there are disproportionate environmental hazards. So that's where you get this, the first part of this definition here, the idea of fair treatment. They want federal agencies to identify and address where there's unfair treatment. And then the second part is important, this idea of meaningful involvement. It's the idea that the communities, need to be able to provide feedback to proposals, for example, to place a landfill in your neighborhood. So this executive order requires federal agencies like the EPA to seek input from communities. So if you've ever heard that the EPA is looking for comments from the community, or the federal government's looking for comments on this proposal, that's the idea behind that. They want to seek feedback from the community. And as part of this order, they have to respond to the feedback. So it's just not collecting a bunch of comments. They have to address the comments from the community. So that's the idea behind environmental justice. And this was an executive order that was passed by President Clinton in 1994. So environmental justice has been, the movement has gained strength over the past 40 years. And I think, recently we've been hearing more about environmental justice issues with what happened in Flint and other issues that are happening now. So I wanted to give you that background so that I can tell you a little bit more about my work in looking at the neighborhood environments and health, and give you a couple of examples of how exactly our neighborhood environments, where we live, work, and play, how that can influence health outcomes. And the first point I want to make is that how communities are designed can affect these health outcomes. So especially for me, I study chronic diseases, and we've seen associations between poor air quality and asthma. Living in a neighborhood that has access to healthy food is important. We've learned during the pandemic how being able to go outside and just being exposed to nature, how beneficial that could be in terms of just, our mental health, our peace of mind. And so thinking about our neighborhoods and how it's been constructed is really important when you think about some of our health outcomes. Disability access. So we've learned that it's important that not everybody is mobile. And so having neighborhoods where the disabled can be able to move around independently is really important, and it can important for their health. So I again, I define, in my work, we've traditionally thought about the environment, and people are like, oh, you're interested in trees and, pollution. Yes, I am, but I'm also interested in the environment, thinking about our surroundings and where people live and work and play. And so this includes our homes, our communities, our workplaces, our transportation systems, and business areas. Okay, so I want to give you some examples of positive influences on our environment. And again, I think this has really become more apparent during the pandemic, just that the benefits of being outside and being exposed to nature. So there's a term that we use that's called green space, and this idea that being exposed to grass, trees, parks, playgrounds can have benefits for our health. And we're not really sure why it's beneficial in terms of the science and the research, but we think that, nature and green space can encourage exercise. Socially, it can provide spaces for socializing. It can decrease air pollution, so that the trees can take some of the pollutants out of the air. We've seen psychological benefits in terms of depression and stress-related issues. And we've even seen some studies of being outside, and people who spend more time outside have better immune function. So it's really interesting, the relationship between going outside and being in green space and health. So that's one example of neighborhood environment and health. And then unfortunately, I did a lot of work with asthma, and in our research, we've seen like in housing issues, so mold, is associated with increased asthma exacerbations. And of course, air pollution we know has an impact on our respiratory health. What I also wanted to point out, so a couple of students a couple of years ago, we looked at whether the relationship, we were really interested in air quality in the St. Louis area. And we identified air quality as one of the environmental justice issues in the area. And so the first thing we did was we mapped out, so on the right is a map of some data we got from the EPA on our air quality. And so the areas in red indicate much poorer air quality than the areas in blue. The areas in blue are much better than the areas in red. And then, so what we saw here is that unfortunately, it seems like we have pockets of poor air quality in our region. And if I can't zoom in here, but you can see that they track around the highways. So this is 44. And then up here, I think is where like I-70 and 270 and 70, they intersect. And is that 55? So these are, if I had a zoom in view, you could see that this air quality tracks along the highways. What was also interesting is that we saw that we mapped out poverty. So we had the students map out poverty, and you can see kind of an overlap between the maps of poverty and poor air quality in our region. And then we also mapped out race and looked at air quality. And again, we could see kind of an overlap of the relationship between race and air quality in the region. So air quality in St. Louis, we believe it is an environmental justice issue here in our region. Another issue that I've seen, and this is an example, I'll give you an example from Baltimore, is we've seen relationships between food deserts and obesity and diabetes. And so please let me know in the chat if you are familiar with the term food desert. A yes or a no? Okay, so we've got one no, a couple of yeses. Okay, so we've got a mixed reaction. So the definition of a food desert is an area that has limited access to affordable and nutritious food. And it's a combination of there being so few grocery stores in a particular area. And then also we take into account that it may be really difficult for people to reach those grocery stores because they may not own cars, or they may not have access to public transportation, or public transportation may not go near these grocery stores. And so what I wanted to point out, I had some really interesting maps from Baltimore. And this is a map that they did in Baltimore at Johns Hopkins, where they mapped out food deserts. And here the definition was not having access to nutritional food within 1 mile of your home. So here in the red are the food deserts, and I will explain. The blue dots are what we call corner stores. So they're not really like grocery stores like we have, you know, like a Snooks or a Deerbergs. They're kind of what I have here on the right, these small corner stores that may carry food. So that's in the blue. And then in the green here are, the green dots are carry out restaurants. So your McDonald's, maybe your Subway. And what we were seeing here in Baltimore, oh, and then I wanted to point, the small yellow dots here are supermarkets. So the point of this figure here is that, you know, this is a food desert because we've got, and especially in those red areas, we've got these corner stores, we've got maybe these carry out restaurants, but very few yellow dots, very few supermarkets. And that can have an influence on our health. You know, if you're not able to even access healthy food, much less buy it and eat it, then that's an issue. And we've seen associations between mapping out where these deserts are and looking at the obesity rate of a community, or looking at the diabetes rate in a community. So what's really new is, we've known about food deserts for a while. This is a map from 2012. What we're learning about now are food swamps. And it's this idea that it's not only bad that you don't have access to any healthy food, but then you're kind of swamped with unhealthy food, much more unhealthy food than healthy food is available. And we have seen recently that being in a food swamp, it's an even stronger indicator of neighborhood obesity and neighborhood diabetes than the food deserts itself. So it's not only not having a grocery store, but it's being in a community that's surrounded by these, fast food restaurants and these corner stores. So those are just a couple of examples of thinking about our neighborhood environment and how that can influence our health. And so, I had this question, like, how do we fix this? How do we promote health? And actually, those are the questions I have for you in your breakout sessions. But, I think we should be thinking about yes, yes. And so there's a comment in the chat where you're seeing with the Greenway efforts and a trail, yes, trying to bring more opportunities to some of these low income communities. So I think I've given away one answer here, but the idea that we need to think about like our planning and our how we lay out our communities and how we can improve food access. So an example up on the right here is a farmer's market, right? And I've seen in some cities, there've been mobile farmers markets. So maybe if we can't really, build a brick and mortar store, maybe we could bring in a food truck or a farmer's market kind of a truck to a neighborhood. In terms of thinking about air quality and transportation, thinking about how we've seen that, this poor air quality around these highways. So thinking about more fuel efficient vehicles, I've seen some communities, I lived in New York for a while, and they did this really interesting, I'll call it an experiment for lack of a better term, but one Saturday a month, they shut down traffic on major avenues in Manhattan. And they laid out picnic tables and seats and chairs. And so they called it, I forgot what they called it. It was something Saturdays, but it was the idea that let's reduce vehicular traffic and let's promote more walking and socializing and just hanging out. So kind of getting those benefits of green space while reducing the benefits of transportation. We need to think about our housing and how we can improve housing, especially in our low income communities. I showed the picture of mold. That's an actual picture from someone's home. And so how can make sure that people have equal access to safe and healthy housing, and then engaging these communities. So what works in one neighborhood doesn't work in another, right? So we need to talk to the residents and figure out, what's the best way that we can provide these opportunities to your community. So that's just a brief introduction to what I hope will be a fruitful discussion. And I see there's a question in the chat. And yes, Fonbon is doing some interesting work about thinking about soil quality in city parks. I had a colleague down at the medical school who looked at city parks, and we've got a lot of work to do in terms of thinking about the safety of some of these parks. So I mentioned parks, and being able to go outside is great, but we found in some communities their parks weren't as safe, and the equipment wasn't as up to date as it needs to be. So again, just thinking about equal access, and more research and more community engagement will make these parks heavier. So I will stop there and see if anyone has any questions. And these are some discussion questions I thought we could think about before we go into our break rooms and think about how we can do better and promote health in St. Louis. So Sister Claire, I think this is our time for questions.
Yes, if anyone has any questions, please type them in the chat. right now. I guess, all right, let's see. All right, are there any opportunities for high school students to get involved with the research?
Hi, Katie. It's good to see you again. Yes, you can contact me. We're really well right now. Actually, with the pandemic, we're not really out there. But I would love to chat with you and think about how we can get the girls more involved in this research. And so the idea, I don't know if you've heard the term citizen scientists. What we're trying to do is trying to promote, you don't have to be at a big university to look around and see what's going on in your neighborhood. And so there are apps and websites where citizens can report what they're seeing in their community. And so that's the idea behind citizen science. So that's an example that we will be able to discuss. So looking forward to chatting with you, Katie.
Okay, the next question, how can we make farmers markets more safe during this pandemic?
Yeah, I have not been to a farmer's market since the pandemic began. And I would, I think it's important, we've got to deal with social distancing and all of the other mitigation efforts. I think there has to be a way. I mean, maybe we think about what I've seen in other cities as this idea of these mobile, not food trucks, but they're like mobile vegetable trucks or mobile fruit and vegetable trucks. So the same kind of measures we take in the grocery store, we would probably take at the truck, 6 feet apart, hand washing, sanitizing between purchases. That may be an option.
Nancy and Reed and Linda Margaret kind of have the same question. How do you suggest we, within this political system and within our communities, address these environmental injustices and work for change?
I can think about what I've seen done in other communities, and it's really, from my perspective, me being an academic, I can provide the data. So actually, the study I did on air quality was through work I had done with our cancer group at Siteman, our community cancer group, and they were concerned about air, they were concerned about water. So I don't know if you guys are familiar with Westlake landfill and what was going on over there. And so they needed, my part is they needed the data. So we did some of the analysis, and we found the data. We could provide them with these maps. And then it's mobilizing, community organizing, all the, we're seeing a lot of community organizing here in the last couple of weeks before the election, but it's really getting people together, coming up with a set of demands and holding our elected officials accountable. I think that's the first step.
Yeah, and I think, well, I know like I live in the Dutchtown area. A lot of like my neighborhood has a Dutchtown community that gets together and does stuff like that. And I think a lot of neighborhoods here in St. Louis do. So that would be a good place to start, or could be a good place to start. Nancy Marsh just made a comment about how you can see the inequity of food store access in the north as opposed to South St. Louis. And then Diane Calcaterra asked, how prevalent are community gardens and are they helpful with food deserts?
They can be. One issue could be the soil. So if we have a community that has a variety of environmental hazards, maybe has poor air quality, poor water quality, that can lead to poor soil quality. And so what good is a home garden if the soil is bad? So there are issues that we need to address before we can get into community gardens. I've seen some great examples of community gardens here in the Jennings area. Of communities getting together and maintaining a garden. So I think that is a really good option. It's just making sure that we have some really high quality soil.
Roland asks, is there any coordination with big box grocery stores to fill in areas needing them?
Yeah, well, what I've seen, there have been some communities. So I believe I want to say the Atlanta metro area, our city, our government hands out permits, right? Where you can build a grocery store. So there's kind of been, a kind of dangling of the carrot where we'll allow you to build in community A, but you also have to put a grocery store in community B. So there are carrots that can be dangled out through policy. Um, there, I think I've seen it when I was in New York, a lot of the restaurants and the grocery stores, there's a lot of waste, food waste. And so they would coordinate with some of our nonprofit organizations, some of our food organizations and pantries and hand out food. So I think there are examples around the country about how there could be coordination with, providing access to healthy food. I do think, unfortunately, in some cases there'll have to be like some carrots, dangled out there to get, sometimes these companies are concerned about the bottom line.
Yes. Kay asks, is there a way to promote more equitable pricing at farmers markets? But, or do you know if in St. Louis, do most of the farmers markets accept the food link cards?
Right, the EBT. I think we're actually looking into that. Well, we were before the pandemic started, but that's one of the things I believe I've heard that they do, but I am not sure. Maybe if someone is on the chat. So okay, so there's one that does accept EBT. I know there's been a movement to get farmers market to accept EBT. The other issue are the costs, right? The price. Some of those prices are prohibitive.
Luann asks, are there some apps and websites where citizen scientists can report concerns in their environment?
There are. I do not have them on the top of my head, but perhaps I could share with the group after the chat or after the presentation. I could share some links for people.
Yeah, that would work. Linda asks, what I experience is the chasm between young people choosing tasty foods rather than healthy foods.
Yeah.
And that's a tough one for me, for all of us. I think.
Yeah. I think that's every lunch lady's dilemma, right? It's hard. I mean, we've been dealing with this in public health for decades. How do we get people to eat healthier? You know what? I can't answer that question.
Suzanne Giblin writes, remember food hucksters that came into the neighborhood? Is that practical now?
I don't recall food hucksters. Could you explain what they were?
Right. Suzanne, can you explain what they are? I don't recall them either.
They were, can you hear me?
Yes.
All right. They were there were deliveries of milk, of ice when we had ice boxes rather than electric refrigerators. There were, the trucksters were kind of a neighborhood Soulard market. They would come with the vegetables of the season and we would buy right from the huckster. So it was that idea of mobile market. And I've not seen one. The closest thing would be the farmer's market that I've seen now. So I would be interested in why that whole idea went away and seemed to me.
Okay.
Yeah, I think maybe you all can tell, I'm really interested in this idea of these mobile farmers markets, these mobile vegetable trucks or mobile fruit trucks. And I've seen it in other settings, and it would be great if we could see it in St. Louis.
Cheryl asks, St. Louis is known to divest in certain neighborhoods. What might be a method for neighborhoods asking elected officials for something better?
It's the It's the age-old question, right? How do we get our elected officials to pay attention to these neighborhoods, with issues? I mean, we're health, food access, violence, crime. I don't know the answer, but I think, well, you know what I've seen on the West Coast, again, it's the idea of communities getting together and kind of, you have the higher income neighborhoods kind of partnering with the lower income neighborhoods, and kind of the example I gave before of dangling the carrot. Oh, Snooks, you want to build a new store in this neighborhood? Well, we need you to set up one over here. So there's policy that could be used to promote equity. And I think, we just, how do we get our elected officials to do anything? I think it's that's a age-old question.
Yes. All right, thank you. That wraps up our question and answer session at this time.
Oh, excuse me, I have one question.
Now we are about to go into our breakout rooms for 20 minutes. But the questions that you see will be in the chat box. Sarah Baker is going to put them in the chat box right now, so you can see them in your chat room. Okay. So then whenever you're doing your sharing in the breakout room, please choose someone to speak on the group's behalf for the large group sharing, which will happen when we come back together. Sarah will place you into the chat rooms, and don't also remember to unmute yourself when you get in there, and have a good discussion, and we look forward to seeing you back and sharing a little more when we get back together. Does everybody see the questions in the chat room? Oh, Jenny posted them.
Yes, the questions are listed in the chat box before you go into the chat room. Again, unmute yourself. If you're on a phone, hit *6 to unmute yourself. And again, choose a speaker to speak in the large group discussion afterwards. Okay, I will place you into your chat rooms now.
Welcome back, everyone. Now we will go into our large group sharing. Before we begin, I invite the chosen speaker from each breakout room to type your name in the chat box if you would like to share your group's thoughts and questions for Dr. Ekenga in the large group. Remember, if you're on a tablet or iPhone, you may need to tap your screen for the chat to appear. I will then call on each person as your name comes in to be listening. And once your name is called, please unmute yourself before speaking. Dr. Ekenga has just now posted a link to the National Geographic Citizen Science projects in case you're interested. And now, all right, Dorothy Dempsey, would you please unmute yourself and share?
Hello. I don't think that we came up with any concrete solutions, but we spoke about a number of things. One of the things that we spoke about was the fair environmental justice system, and from 1960 up until this point, nothing has changed. We in 2020 and nothing has changed. We spoke about the stores, and some of the stores, like for example, if you go to a Snooks grocery store now, and you can go to the Snooks at, say, for example, on Natural Bridge and Kings Highway, and you go to a Snooks store on Lucas and Hunt. I'm sorry, on Clayton Road. The quality of the food is different. The food is different. I have actually had to leave my neighborhood and go to a Clayton store to shop.
Mm-hmm.
That should not be so.
Yeah.
That is a difference. When Christine spoke about the, what did you call them, food banks? I'm sorry that that didn't click in my brain right away. I know exactly what the food banks are like. Exactly what they're like. They're all over our neighborhoods.
Mm-hmm.
And when you talk about the fast food stores, they're all over our neighborhoods. They're everywhere. They won't even clean up around the fast food places. They just plop down in our neighborhoods and they make money. They
Yeah.
don't do that in other neighborhoods. They clean up. They have a cleaning crew to clean up. But they're just there to make money. And that's it. So what are our solutions? What do we do about all of this? The only thing that I can say is that we as Black people have been so accepting of things that have been so unjust towards us. So unjust towards us. All of these things that happen, Flint, Michigan, all of those people, when you think about those people and the unjust things that happen to those people, those children that are suffering because of the injustice of what happened in Flint, Michigan, and is still going on. What do? You ask to come back to the from our break room. It's where is the solution? Where is the solution to all of this? We're talking about 400 years. Where is the solution to all of this? We just keep on working. We don't give up. I heard something this morning and from a pastor, and this is the only thing that gives, I said to myself, I said, you know what? It's got to be all about love. It's got to be exactly what this pastor said. Walk together, children. Don't get weary. We shall all come together in the promised land. And that's all that I can leave with you. Walk together, children. Don't get weary. We shall all come together in the promised land. Okay?
Yes.
Okay. All right.
Thank you, Dorothy. Linda Markway.
Unfortunately, I was kicked off through our conversation. So I missed a lot of it, but
Just share
our
brief.
group did have more. Sorry, Claire. Group had more questions. A question of whose responsibility is it to help people know what is better or healthier for them? Question of who determines what's healthy or better for them? How do we help get that message out? And like Dorothy said, it's a lifelong conversation that we need to continue happening. The one thing that we talked about at the very end was the food bank at Fontbonne University. We have a food bank for our students, and it's managed by our consumer education department. And one of the things that Jamie Doherty, the director of that program, really is very strict about and very, what would I say, conscientious, is the kinds of donations that are made, therefore the kinds of things that are given out to our Fontbonne family are healthy. They are easily accessible kinds of things. She has a list, and that's what she sticks to. And I think that in itself is educating a new generation of young adults. So again,
Thank
missed
you.
Thank you.
Suzanne Giblin.
You'll need to unmute Sister Suzanne. There you go.
There we go.
Yes, thank you. We focus mostly on examples of things that had happened or that we could do. And Jane talked about an example in the Chicago area of when a building was emptied or sold and torn down, then the neighborhood was encouraged to plant gardens, and the neighbors respected that area because they respected the neighbors, which was a segue to getting to know our neighbors. Even in walking in the neighborhoods now, when we want and need to get out of our houses with COVID, getting to know our neighbors and linking arms with them. Something that I mentioned that would be a personal thing would be when I see a neighborhood group, I think, oh, what will my voice mean when I go to a 7 o'clock meeting one evening? And I think using our voices to speak for change is so important. And it's something that that each of us can do, whether it's by signing a petition or attending a meeting, raising awareness, and educating. I think that's probably those were the most substantial things that we talked about.
Yes, thank you, Suzanne.
Mm-hmm.
Joan Coucher.
When we talked, we looked at the different areas where we were. Some people were at Carondelet or in Dutchtown and outside here at Nazareth. What seemed to be is there's been change in the last 20 years, even in the stores that were in South City. So we can imagine what North area is like. So much now is for what is the profit that these stores are going to have. So whatever we can do to affect the stores, you know, not making a profit in the sense that we can put our input in that there should be more. So when they take over, to get to the idea of the policy, whatever the city policy is, our county, and know what it's like, it makes assumptions that the people can get to these places, if there are any, by car or by bus. And what Dorothy said, the foods that are there are not the same as they used to be 20 years ago, that they've changed in the quality.
Yeah, that's a good point.
We talked about gardens, but like in the area of Carondelet, probably the soil there is not the best either. I'm not sure that they've torn down houses in that area that they could put gardens in, but there are not people that are organizing, it seems like. A couple areas they quoted were just overgrown with weeds, but maybe again, that's because the soil is no good. Trying to be conscious of just what the needs are and trying to get the politicians to be part of these meetings that people want to have. You know, some grocery chains used to share items at the end of the day that were excess, but now because of pandemic, they don't do that either, to give food banks or other places those items to be able to pass on to folks. And I know, you know, the food collection at the end of the month at St. Stephen's is very much welcome because the number of people who are now in need has changed. So I think our generosity in whatever way we can is what's important at this point, as well as keeping aware of the issues.
Yes. Okay, briefly, we have 3 more groups to share. Janet Kajachik.
I'm sorry, Janet. There you go.
There we go. All right. Well, 3 of us were kind of in the Carondelet area. So we talked about, the store that we have here, which is a Schnucks Market, which is good, but, not everyone can get to that store. It's with some people in this neighborhood, it'd be quite a trek, to get there and then to carry your groceries home. We don't have a whole lot of corner stores, and, not sure of what they offer. In the North City, Patricia from the North City was telling us that she has found that different stores in the area offer different things, and they're not all in walking distance. So again, transportation is an issue. Patricia also was saying that pantries are getting better as far as offering some fresh foods, maybe some vegetables or fruits, but people often do not choose those because they don't know how to prepare them or to cook them. So, it needs to be some education around that. I was sharing when I lived in the Central West End, we were fairly close to City Greens. And when they used St. Cronen's basement once a week, what they did was contract with a farmer who would bring in fresh fruits and vegetables. And then they would prepare, every week they would prepare some of these and offer samples and then give out recipes so that people could then perhaps, buy them and find out, yeah, this is pretty good. And I know what I can do with them. We also talked about the importance of shopping around the edge of the stores where things are healthier rather than the interior of the store where you have more processed foods. And that, a big issue about placement of stores is transportation and also the safety of the neighborhood. If you have to walk to a store, how safe is your neighborhood? We also talked about just the idea of convenience. If you are shopping after work and you're trying to feed your family, often you just don't have the time to go to the edge of the store, as it were, and find the fresher fruits and vegetables and those kinds of things, because you just don't have the time to do that. And I want to just add, since that, I have noticed at Schnucks, and some of the stores are doing this, where they are offering what they call, I don't know what the term they give it, but basically it's what they used to call like the ugly fruit and vegetables that were not just perfect, but are still fine, to eat and to enjoy, and, at reduced prices. Because about 40% of the US food never gets to the market. We waste it.
Mm-hmm.
Part of it is it just might not be perfectly round or perfect, whatever the perfect shape is that we imagine for that fruit or vegetable.
Mm-hmm.
So, there is some movement towards offering that because it's perfectly fine to eat. So anyway, I think that's about it.
Yeah, thank you, Janet. All right, our last group sharing is with Katie Lotus.
Hi, so I was lucky enough to be in a group with folks
Hi,
from
Katie.
and Sister Janet, and also from Green Bay, as well as the Mother House. And a lot of things we hit on, it sounds like you all hit on, so I'll try and be brief. One thing that I thought was pretty interesting is the idea of planting like fruit trees and more permaculture things in public parks, so that would be something that maybe people could actually get food by just, picking an apple or picking persimmons off the ground or something like that. We were pretty adamant on folks have to work together. So all the different agencies, we can't say that it's, one agency is more important than the others, or we won't get to that point where there's a synergy and folks are working together. And looking at, food choice, like it's fast food is cheap, it's tasty, and it's convenient. And so as you all have mentioned, a few different groups mentioned, like we need folks to understand how to cook healthy food, and that it's going to taste good, and that, you know, that's going to be something important. So we were pretty big on, you know, if this is a pro-life issue, that it's all connected, and, you know, pro-life isn't just have a baby born, it's the womb to the tomb kind of deal, as people say. So just getting involved is going to be important, like letting your elected officials know what you think is important, and then doing something about it.
Thank you, Katie.
That you all had already mentioned, but those were things I think that were a little bit unique for our group.
Yes, thank you. Well, thank you everyone for sharing. It's been a rich sharing today. Joe Talk from Dr. Ekenga and all the sharing that we have done. Thank you. Before I do the closing prayers, I want to thank Jenny and Sarah, our communications director and specialist, for assisting us today. For Cheryl and all those on our Cultural and Racial Justice Committee that make this series possible. This is our first virtual one, but I'm sure not our last virtual one. We'll be back in person as soon as possible, but we don't know when that will be. So thank you for joining us virtually today. And look out for coming up here. We're going to have Racial and Cultural Justice Committee is busy, and we're going to have a lot of we're going to have a lot of announcements that you can be a part of to try so that we can work together to end systemic racism and work on these issues together. So look out for those announcements coming up. And of course, thank you for Dr. Ekenga for spending the morning with us and sharing your knowledge with us. So I'll close us out with a prayer for our earth from Pope Francis. And it was for Laudato Si. All-powerful God, you are present in the whole universe and in the smallest of your creatures. You embrace with your tenderness all that exists. Pour out upon us the power of your love, that we may protect life and beauty. Fill us with peace, that we may live as brothers and sisters, harming no one. O God of those who are poor, help us to rescue the abandoned and forgotten of this earth, so precious in your eyes. Bring healing to our lives, that we may protect the world and not prey on it, that we may sow beauty, not pollution and destruction. Touch the hearts of those who look only for gain at the expense of the poor in the earth. Teach us to discover the worth of each thing, to be filled with awe and contemplation, to recognize that we are profoundly united with every creature. As we journey towards your infinite light, we thank you for being with us each day. Encourage us, we pray, in our struggle for justice, love, and peace. Amen. So you can unmute yourself and say bye and thank. And that's the end of our program today. Thank you.
Thank you.
Claire.
Thank you,
Thank you,
Claire.
Claire.
Very much.
Thank you.